On one front, growth was halted by the Atlantic Ocean. In Africa, it was the Sahara Desert, a place Romans said had not a drop of water anywhere in ground or sky. To the north, climate set the boundary. Expansion went well into present-day Germany, but Romans never ventured far from land where they could grow olives and grapes.
They went beyond the world of the olive and the vine into northern Europe, beyond the Black Sea, and they thought this was a very strange world indeed, because they crossed these sort of vegetable boundaries, if you like, into a world that was full of beer drinkers, in which people cooked with butter rather than olive oil. Vita vinum est. Life is wine. And that was true for most Romans. Life was wine.
So the final push took them eastward. The last great conquest was Dacia, a rich empire in modern-day Romania. The Emperor Trajan's great victory there in 106 AD brought spectacular spoils back to Rome. Tens of thousands of slaves, 182 tons of gold, 165,000 tons of silver. Treasure enough to transform the city of Rome. Grand new monuments, including the spectacular Trajan's Column, depicting every phase of the Dacian Wars. Treasure enough to stage the last great victory celebration, 35 days of non-stop games and partying. This great haul of spoils was spectacular and awe-inspiring, but it was also the last. Never again would splendor on this scale rain down on the empire. It was a grand and glorious time, a time of excess and celebration. But did anyone notice a few small but significant changes? Prices had been steadily creeping up, especially for two crucial expenses, grain and the military.
Inflation is rampant. The government is desperately attempting to fund army by printing more money. Gold reserves are down, prices rose daily. You couldn't be sure of the real value of any of the money in your pocket.
Meanwhile, in the 2nd century AD, the amount of silver in the coins themselves began to fall. Coins that had once been nearly pure silver eventually contained just 40% of the precious metal. In fact, the mines were running out of silver, and that wasn't the only natural resource running dry. Africa and the East had been so plundered for wild animals to supply the games that some were becoming hard to find. At least one species, the Moroccan elephant, was driven to extinction. There were other small, almost unnoticeable signs of a change in the winds of prosperity. Ancient writers spoke of corruption and greed resulting from Rome's immeasurable wealth.
Fortune introduced an excess of wealth, and morals collapsed before prosperity. The spoils of war encouraged extravagance. Public office was stolen through bribery. Trust was shattered, and war was a source of profit for many. Lucan.
Romans began to see extremes of wealth and luxury as a vice. But at the same time, a universal hatred for the tax collector made tax evasion something of a sport.
Should you wish to abuse a tax collector, you might try saying burden, pack animal, sneak thief, shark, oppressor of the downtrodden, strangler, nail in my coffin, and all the other vile terms you can find. Petronius.
Still, hatred for the taxman didn't keep taxes from rising. Maintaining the empire was expensive, And now that it was no longer expanding, there were no more spoils of war. Defense had become Rome's largest single expense. The Emperor Marcus Aurelius tried to solve the problem as Romans always had, by going to war. In 162 AD, he invaded the Parthian Empire in the east. It was the end of the Pax Romana, and it was a war the overextended and out-of-practice legions were destined to lose. When the soldiers returned to Roman soil, they carried a few treasures and something else. Of all the things Romans had brought home from abroad, this final import was as ironic as it was devastating.
We are soldiers of the 15th Legion. We've been at war against the King of Parthia. We took the capital city, but held it only a short time. In retreat, we've had to hide our spoils along the way. Most of the legionaries are sick. Soldiers who were hale and celebrating with us just a few days ago are dead. The towns where we usually stop won't even let us in. They say we're doomed. They say it's the plague.
To this day, no one knows exactly what dread disease those soldiers carried home from the east. Probably not the bubonic plague that ravaged Europe centuries later, but something just as horrible. Uncounted thousands died in Rome and other cities across the empire.
Such great pestilence devastated all Italy that everywhere estates, fields, and towns were left deserted. Without farmers or inhabitants, they reverted to ruins and woodland.
The disease spread like wildfire, hitching a ride with those who traveled the great roads of empire. It is said a quarter of the population died.
From the frontiers of the Persians as far as the Rhine and Gaul, the foul touch of plague polluted everything with contagion and death. Ammianus.
At the same time, far to the north, Rome faced a different threat. Barbarians had been massing along the borders for some time. It's impossible to know if the German tribes perceived the weakness of this moment, some desperate change in Rome's luck in the throes of the plague. What we do know is they chose this moment to attack. For the first time in 200 years, a foreign army crossed a boundary, the Danube River, and invaded the Roman Empire. The Roman legions chased them back, but it was only a taste of what was to come. Rome was now, and forever after, looking over her shoulder. Did anyone actually notice the bloom was off the rose? It's more likely the moment quietly came and went. The empire was by no means at an end. Its fortunes would ebb and flow for centuries yet. But the greatest empire the world had ever known was now slipping through Rome's grasp. Whatever you choose to call it, arrogance, greed, corruption, cynicism, or simple bad luck, whatever it was, one day the slow decay of power and glory began. And the Roman Empire ceased its splendid rise.